Hello, I'm Senya Lubisich.
And I'm Eloy Zarate, storyteller, historian.
Today we want to talk with you about something that has been called tricks of evidence.
And this is where the storytellers really are really good at doing this.
Oh boy, do they shine.
We really know what to do with evidence.
I want to start off by having you think about this statement. This was something that Professor Armesto wrote in his text, The World. The cultures of Eurasia churned out huge amounts of documents and literature, much of which we can read today. This alone accounts for their dominant place in historical tradition compared with cultures that employed other, less accessible ways to record events and ideas. And so, with that being said, in all historical inquiry, you need to allow for a trick of the evidence. And we want to take some time to explain what those tricks are.
And what we're also talking about here, it's much easier in a way when you're looking at chemistry or biology, when you have evidence and you say something weighs a certain amount or is in a certain form, and you can kind of look at that and go, okay, I understand that. You can fudge that evidence. But here, when things are told in a story, the way historians or storytellers get things across, it's often quite difficult to be able to say, how are they putting together the evidence that's being presented? Because it is in a narrative form. And also some of the things, think of the stories that you can't relate to, that don't talk to you, and how you won't be able to ask certain questions because you don't know what you're looking at.
So one of the first tricks that we want you to be thinking about is the process of translation, but also very importantly, transmission. When we're looking at primary sources in a world history course, we are drawing on languages and cultures, dialects, some of which are familiar and easily readable, we think, others that are much more remote and require a greater amount of work to try to understand just at the base level of transliteration, of just getting word to word, not even yet to the meaning or intention of the text.
This is an important thing to be able to think about. And again, when you're hearing a story, you usually don't ask yourself, where is that source? What language is the original in? You're just trusting the historian or trusting the storyteller to say, hey, isn't this a great story? Look at what I'm telling you about the past. But actually, how do you know if something has been articulated in a particular way and put within the narrative? And that's what we're going to try to do here. When you're thinking about translation in world history, if you're talking and having two societies speaking to each other, how are they communicating? And who is doing the communicating between areas?
And do give thought to the complexity of language. Even just the simple communication between people at the same time is something we talk a lot about at our house. My mother-in-law is from Argentina, and the Spanish spoken in Argentina has some very fundamental differences with the Spanish that's spoken in Mexico. So for example, the word coger means something very, very different in Argentina than it does in Mexico. And my mother-in-law will always say when somebody asks her to grab a bag, she hears something entirely different. And this is a translation or transmission that's happening in real time. So when you start expanding that translation or transmission over decades, over centuries, over millennia, it becomes even more complicated to make sense of what that original meaning might have been or what the intent could have been.
Now, for all of you Latin Americans out there, people who speak Spanish and understand these differences, that came out of her mouth. So that's very important to understand, that even that kind of layer of understanding, or even it's true, for people who don't know or did not hear, don't understand what she just said, just the last few seconds of what we've been speaking about, you have no idea what's being said. And that is often what happens when a historian is trying to communicate something. They're trying to communicate to their audience in the best possible way. But some people are going to be lost in that. And that's when you need to start asking questions. What did I just miss?
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Identification is another trick of the evidence. What are the sources that we are identifying? And this really comes down, again, to the person who is doing the questioning. It is the things that you are choosing to identify, the places that you are choosing to look. Are you somebody like me who really loves social history, and so therefore do you tend to look at sources that speak to the social components or social context that you're trying to understand? How are you identifying the sources that you're going to use as you strive to answer these questions that you have?
Another thing that you should be thinking about here is that we are letting you into a dark place in historical research and historical writing, right? We're kind of like putting it out there for you to understand that there are tricks, that there are problems. An honest historian, a person with integrity, will do that. And that is something that's very important about being a professional historian or a professional teacher or a professional storyteller that likes to get people just to be interested. So when we're dealing with identification, remember the idea, is the story speaking to you? Because if it is speaking to you, then it might have something to do with what is being selected, what's being identified. This is what I want to communicate. If we just started speaking in another language and not think about you, then you'd be sitting there, oh, I'm not being spoken to. So how you're identifying sources, how somebody has a bias of their interests and also the bias of their audience is something that has to be taken into consideration.
So then the last trick that we want you to think about is selection. Once you do have your sources and you're going to construct that narrative, history is a process of selecting. You're not necessarily going to be able to include every single thing you found, nor have you necessarily found everything that you ought to include. So you are going to make a series of choices. And when you make those choices, you do something that we often refer to as silencing the past. You are picking one voice or one situation that you're going to speak to, and the others are going to start to fade away. And if that one thing you've selected becomes dominant enough, those others will actually end up disappearing, which we're going to talk about again in another video.
So this is another thing that you have to be thinking about. You're in college, you've taken high school classes, you've had classes since you were a little child. If you grew up in California, there's a certain curriculum. And maybe some of you who are not history majors are sitting there going, why do I have to take the same class over again? Why do I have to take this class? I took it as a freshman in high school. If the professor's doing his job, you enter that class, and the first thing that should be entering your mind is, I've never heard that story before. So there's a clue. You've been given something or told something that now is going to be expanded, or you might raise your hand in the middle of class, it's like, why haven't I ever been told this? This makes a lot of sense. Or on the other hand, this doesn't make any sense to me. So these are the discussions that you have to stay, and looking at selection is very important.
So lastly, one of the most powerful things I think that Professor Armesto said is that history is a collection of glimpses and glances. We don't have a laboratory. You can't bring people from the past into a sterile environment and question them and understand them. We have to work from the artifacts and remnants that have been left behind, and those are not complete or coherent necessarily. And so we are dealing with glimpses, glances, and shadows. So if we're really going to do our work, we're going to ask questions and be far more concerned with the questions than we are with the answers. And we are going to strive always not to say just what we know, but again, if you're an ethical professional, how you know it. You're going to leave that record of sources showing what you used, what you selected and identified, and also what you left out.
And that's important to understand in terms of the storyteller. Our ethics are a little shaky, that's true. Because what we won't do and what a historian will do, when you ask a historian, how do you know that? They will say, that document is allowing me to go back and understand the past. A storyteller will tell you, can we talk about that after the class meeting? We can talk about that all you want. Because if they can't come up with the actual document or where they know why they're saying what they're saying, it kind of messes up the story.
Sounds like we need a video. Tricks of the presentation.
That's me.
Thank you.